Consultant. Martha Friedrich, PICNAP CSIS Client Services.
And I'm MJ Vincent. I'm a Field Support Specialist and your trainer for today's session.
Yes, and today we're going to do something a little different. We would like to go ahead and when you have questions, we're going to be using the question and answer feature, but we're going to stop the presentation in 3 different spots to answer the questions. So you're welcome to type in the questions, but we won't be answering them as they come in. We'll be answering them during those break sessions. Okay, take it away, MJ.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thanks again for your patience while we got set up here at CDE. So I'm MJ Vincent. I work for FICNAP CSIS, and I'm a Field Support Specialist. That means I work in client services for CALPADS. You may have had some interaction with me in other trainings offered by CSIS or through the support tickets that you submit to the service desk. Today's training is meant for CALPADS LEA Admin account holders and focuses on student data privacy and CALPADS, and also the student data privacy with the data that we enter into CALPADS. Before we begin, though, I really want to acknowledge you. Thank you so much for your time. I recognize that it is the middle of the lunch hour and possibly also your spring break. And I heard from many of you who were concerned because of those 2 things, and so I just really want to say how much we appreciate you taking your time to be here. As Marianne mentioned, we're going to ask that you keep your questions for 3 particular intervals where we'll stop in the training. And this is because we really want you to take some time to just focus on what's being presented, and we may cover the question that you have as we move through the material. We also are lucky to have the CALPADS data privacy experts in the room with us as we give the presentation here at CDE. It's a little bit different than how we normally give the CSIS training. And so you have a good opportunity to talk directly to folks at CDE today. So do ask your questions or have those questions ready for when we take the break. So with that, who should be here today? Those are those LEA account holders who have the LEA main account, or possibly you are supervisor of someone who is an LEA admin account holder, or you may yourself be a superintendent or charter school administrator. And what we will cover today. In today's training, we are going to take a high-level look at those data privacy issues by summarizing laws, reviewing the CALPADS administrator application, and looking at the rules of behavior agreement that's contained within that application. We're going to talk about some data governance terms, and we'll define a couple of concepts around data governance, and then we'll look at local practices, some ways in which the work that we do with CALPADS fits into those local practices, and we'll provide you some resources so that you can grow the knowledge that you learned today. So before we begin, I want to let you know that I am not a lawyer and this training is not meant to be legal advice. If you have specific legal questions, they should be directed to your legal counsel. The purpose of the presentation is to give you a general overview to help you ask the right questions when consulting with your legal counsel. The intent of this training is to impart a basic understanding of what must be done to protect data privacy. Questions related to options for encryption and secure electronic transfer of data should be directed to your IT support. There are many data privacy laws and statutes, and while this presentation will highlight a few of them for you, you should consult legal counsel to determine the specific implications of any given situation. With that, we will also provide you resources where you can start your research, or if you have questions where you might begin to understand some best practices around those and places you can go to get more information. So this map on your screen is a map as of March 18th. This shows from January 2016 to March 18th of 2018, the 319 cyber attacks that happened in the K-12 environment. This is an awesome visualization of the problems that we face daily. Whether we are aware of it or not, this is what's happening. As public education increasingly relies on technology for teaching, learning, assessing, for state and federal reporting like CALPADS, it's imperative that effective policy and practice are in place to protect young people. This map was created by EdTech Strategies, and they built this map for two reasons. One was so that there was a database awareness of just the scope and variety of privacy threats that are facing K-12 institutions, and that they wanted to also shed light on this idea that we need some uniform standards for how we disclose incidents that affect schools, students, and educators. The legend at the bottom has the codes for what each of the pins mean. And even though it kind of looks like there's more incidences that occurred on the East Coast, it's really based on population and is pretty spread out. It's pretty proportionate to the population of students in each of these areas. The legend, blue is phishing attacks, purple is breaches or hacks resulting in the disclosure of personal data, yellow is ransomware attacks, green are denial of service attacks, and red is other cyber incidences resulting in school disruptions and unauthorized disclosures. The EdTech Strategies also has a Twitter you can follow. It's at K12 Cyber Map, and they frequently publish incidences that occur, sort of how they came to find out that the data breach occurred, and then what the resulting impact was. And so if you're interested, there is more information in the PowerPoint slide notes so that you can either follow them on Twitter or you can check out those pins for yourself to see what has occurred. The next slide, this is slide 6. Elizabeth created this slide from her data security and data privacy and data security training that she gives statewide. But this I included because I feel like this is a great way to have a quick summary of the types of cyber scams that are common. Each of the circles describes what that attack contains and how those criminal elements are trying to access data and what it is they're trying to do with that data. One that's not listed here is denial of service attack. That's when the network or targeted machine is flooded with kind of bogus results. Bogus requests in an attempt to overload the actual business that is supposed to occur on that network, and it prevents legitimate business from happening. And so that was one of the pins on the previous map that's not listed here. But these are the really common kinds of cyber scams that we see. So next we're going to show you a video. This is the FERPA 101 video on YouTube, and this video kind of it's a really good overview of FERPA and the obligations of an LEA, particularly, and I'd like you to focus on the idea of directory information and the opt-out requirements of the LEA. This is just easily found on YouTube, and I'll give you the links to it so that you can share it in your LEAs as well.
The Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, or FERPA, is a federal law which applies to educational institutions and agencies, such as schools, school districts, colleges, and universities, to which funds have been available under any program administered by the Secretary of Education. The purpose of FERPA is to protect the privacy of parents and students with regard to education records under Section 444 of the General Education Provisions Act as amended. Wow, it's easy to get confused with all that legal language. Let's try that again in plain English. The truth is, data about us is everywhere. It's collected when we shop, take a vacation, look at a web page, or send an email. You see, FERPA is a federal law that applies to most schools, colleges, and universities. It's meant to protect all that identifiable information about students in records that are kept by schools, and it provides the right for you to access that information, to seek to correct it, and generally to consent to its disclosure. Let's take a closer look at what that means. Today is Patrick's first day of kindergarten. As Patrick moves through the education system, his schools accumulate data, such as his grades, learning disabilities, or special needs information, and disciplinary information. As Patrick takes tests to see how he's progressing, his scores are protected by FERPA. FERPA requires schools and state and local educational agencies to keep the information that came from Patrick's records private and get his parents' written consent before sharing it with anyone else. There are some exceptions. But the general rule is Patrick's records are confidential. Students don't attend school anonymously, so schools routinely share some basic information about students, called directory information. If a school is going to share directory information, it must notify parents and students who are 18 or over or who attend post-secondary institutions. For example, Patrick's school yearbook contains his name, grade level, and photograph. That's okay because his school designated these items as directory information and published its policy on its website, and Patrick's parents haven't opted out. FERPA also requires schools provide Patrick's parents the ability to review his records to make sure they are accurate. Patrick's applying to college. He and his parents review his high school transcript and discover the school has gotten Patrick confused with another student who has lower grades. This isn't good. FERPA not only gives his parents the right to see the records, but also to request that the school correct mistakes. If Patrick's parents and the school disagree on the accuracy of the info, FERPA gives Patrick's parents the right to request a hearing. Colleges and universities are also required to protect student information under FERPA, but the rules change a bit. Meet Lisa, a high school graduate who is headed off to college. Hooray! While Lisa was in elementary, middle, and high school and under the age of 18, FERPA allowed her parents access to her education records. Now, Lisa is entering college, and her FERPA rights transfer from her parents to her. Her parents wonder, but wait a minute, I'm paying the bills here, and now I can't see how she's doing academically? Since Lisa's parents claim her as a dependent on their federal tax return, her parents can still see her education records if Lisa's college chooses to release them. FERPA doesn't require schools to release records, it only allows this. You may be wondering, how do I find out more about how FERPA affects me or my child? To start, look for your school or school district's FERPA policy on its website, or ask your principal or school administrative staff about your rights under FERPA. Visit the Department of Education's Family Policy Compliance Office website for answers to frequently asked questions on privacy, training, and guidance for parents and students on FERPA rights and protections.
The video sort of talks at the viewer from the perspective as though you're a parent. But I do think that that's really relevant to most LEA admin folks or people who work with CALPADS who have any interaction with parents. This is the kind of questions that they probably would have. Or if you yourself are a parent, you may wonder how your student's data is being handled. Particularly like this video because it talks directly to directory information, and that's a main issue when it comes to CALPADS and data privacy. FERPA is the main law protecting student data. This law was passed about 42 years ago, and for a long time it was fine. Obviously things have changed in the time since it was enacted, but the main crux that we're going to focus on is this idea of directory information, those elements of a student's record that may seem to be commonly used in school business, such as the name, the address or phone number of the student is sometimes designated as directory information. This is information that the LEA determines they need to use that's not typically considered harmful or an invasion of privacy if it's released. The main crux of FERPA is that the school has to have a policy about what is considered directory information. That school must then also notify parents what information is going to be used as directory information. It must be published. Sometimes you'll see this in a parent handbook or a student right handbook. Sometimes on registration material, the information will be disclosed there. You must also notify parents of their ability to opt out of using directory information. Your SIS needs to have a place where that information can be stored, that student has been opted out of directory information. There are some places where you're not able to exclude disclosure of information, and the military is one. So the ed code is listed here in the bottom center icon. And then, of course, there are other circumstances in which records or information can be shared without consent. And so, again, those situations occur and are covered under FERPA. Your legal counsel would definitely be involved in those types of situations. One of the main sort of verbiages we get from FERPA is this idea of legitimate educational interest. This means that districts have to use reasonable methods to assure that school officials have access to only those records in which they have a legitimate educational interest. So for example, each of you is tasked with doing some bit of CALPADS data recording or CALPADS data entry. And so you would be designated as a school official who has a specific right to records in order to partake in that legitimate educational interest. Your reporting to CALPADS is that business interest. This is a requirement under FERPA, and there are FAQs from the Department of Education, and those are also listed in the notes for the slide. So even though we've had FERPA for quite some time, the federal government saw areas where there was not a complete safety net over student data or data in general. And some of those federal laws that affect privacy are listed here on slide 10. You probably all heard of HIPAA. This is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, and it applies specifically to health information and how electronic transactions happen. However, you may be aware of some health information related to a student who attends your school because of your relationship with CALPADS or data reporting. The Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment applies to those LEAs that receive Department of Education funding, and it specifically looks at surveys and evaluations and analysis and how that data is used. The National School Lunch Act gave us the free and reduced meal program, and this act specifically looks at the ways in which information is disclosed about a student's free or reduced price meal status. That information, of course, lets us know individually about that person's family income, and so again, it's sensitive information. The IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Act, that looks at a free and appropriate public education for individuals with disabilities. So students with disabilities are part of that, are covered under IDEA. The Children's Online Privacy Protection Act was enacted by the Federal Trade Commission, and it allows that information be used for educational purposes when a school district has educational apps or other programs from an outside entity, that the information collected about those who participate is only used for educational purposes, and that there's specific guidelines for the kinds of websites and applications that the students are using. The Children's Internet Protection Act is another federal law that speaks directly to those LEAs who receive E-rate funding, and it ensures that they have a safety policy for the internet that blocks or filters content that's considered obscene or harmful to minors. The states had to get in on this too because they recognized that there was a significant pile of data being amassed at the state level. And so since 2013, 39 states have introduced or passed laws specific to student data privacy. Again, the states saw that students would likely not know that their private information was violated until many years later when they come of age and apply for credit or look for jobs and are somehow mistaken for being someone else. This unauthorized use of their personal identifying information only becomes apparent many years after it could potentially happen. And so the states recognize that data was at a greater risk because of the way that students are children. They don't monitor their credit the way that adults would. You can see here the dark blue is states that did pass a law that pertained to student privacy and student data privacy. The blue were states that had enacted or had introduced law but had not passed it at that time. So here in California, they knew that data would be important. The data collected in CALPADS and the data that was reported to the federal government would be important in improving and quantifying what was happening in public education in California. So even though there were federal laws and there were state laws that were, there were federal laws and there was state action around protecting student data privacy, there were education code that was specifically enacted so that research and public policy could both use the data. We see here section 49079.5 through .7. This specifically spoke to making longitudinal educational data, which is CALPADS, accessible to researchers so that they could evaluate effectiveness of instructional materials, of educational strategies, different approaches to teaching different types of pupils. So this should sound familiar to those of you familiar with CALPADS. Those data elements that we collect and aggregate are then given to researchers so that they can look at effectiveness. And this was written into Ed Code with the assumption that the data would be stripped of personal identifying information and given to researchers so that they could compile and comply with federal and state privacy laws, but still make strides in public education. The second Ed Code cited, 49558, looks at the way that we share information between agencies related to the National School Lunch Program. How it specified and gave guidance as to the transfer of information between different agencies. And it limited that information to be only for the specific purpose at hand. And then the last Ed Code is 60607, and this is related to assessment data that's collected. Obviously, assessment information is not considered directory information. It is private information. And so this Ed Code was passed in order to, or was enacted in order to ensure that there was a strict way in which assessment data was used and then the ways that it can be shared amongst different agencies. Even further, this slide, slide 13, has a variety of elements which touch on student data and its use under California law. So first we see Title 12, Part 2 of the Penal Code. This put restrictions on the way that, so if your LEA has electronic equipment like computers or tablets given to each student, the information that that student has on that device has more strict limitations about the ownership of that content. And this was passed in order to give students privacy to data or information that they may have on devices that belong to LEAs or to schools. AB 1584, which has also been enacted into Ed Code, protects pupil records privacy in third-party contracts. And so this was specifically around those third-party vendors who come into a school and provide either websites or apps, but then collect information about students. There are privacy protections both from FERPA and state and federal, other state and federal laws that the vendor has to comply with. And so the California Student Privacy Alliance, that's the acronym CSPA, it's a collaboration of California school districts that share these kinds of privacy concerns about third-party vendors. This alliance was formed in order to share contracts and contract language that complies with state and federal regulations that would then allow those third-party vendors or websites or educational programs to then come in and be in compliance without having to go through the long legal vetting process, or at least have a place to start. And then I added SOPIPA here to the state privacy laws in sort of the same format as we saw in the federal law. SOPIPA is the Student Online Personal Information Protection Act, and this is a California privacy law. This prohibits educational technology service providers from selling student data or amassing data from students they provide services to and then marketing commercial products back to them for non-educational purposes. So this is another state law that was passed in effort of student privacy. So even with all of these state and federal laws and all of this awareness of the kinds of risk that data out there has, our state attorney general recommendations are very common sense. These are the approaches to student data that our attorney general has published. And of course, you know, I want to acknowledge that each of you understands the responsibility that you have to the students that you work with, that you see every day in your day-to-day work. And you probably are already taking these specific common sense approaches to much of the work that you do. But even though you're using common sense and you're doing what privacy protections that you have locally, those state and federal laws that we just covered, those apply. And the purpose of having the LEA Admin application, which we will discuss in great detail today, is really to get a place where there's some synergy between those state and federal laws and this common sense recommendation from the California Attorney General. The kinds of things that we see are not these huge data breaches. At the service desk, we see things like folks sending us attachments of raw data via email, asking us questions about what they should do, or sending us a screenshot of CALPADS or of your local student information system and then emailing it to us and other people. We see folks telling us about how some specific report or raw data was printed from CALPADS or from the local SIS and left on a desk, or how a student is working at the same desk as the CALPAD school site user. They're inputting data into CALPADS, or someone is sharing a user ID or password. And so we really want to address both the concept of the state and federal law, these you know, really overarching umbrella ideas that govern the work we do, and then also the common sense kinds of things that we know help us to protect student data day to day. And so with that, before we move into the next section, I think we're going to go ahead and take some questions, so I'll turn it over to Marianne and Elizabeth.
We have some great questions, so thank you so much. Let's start at the beginning. One of the questions is, if a vendor is requesting parent email account information, do we need expressed permission by the parent to release it?
So I would say, and again, I'm not an attorney, so don't consider this, oh, I'm Elizabeth from the California Department of Education. I'm the privacy consultant, but I'm not an attorney. So this is not legal advice. That said, under FERPA, if you considered the email addresses of parents to be part of your directory information and the parents had not opted out, that would be one way to go about it. That said, under SOPIPA and AB 1584, which were just covered, you cannot, educational technology vendors are not entitled to receive information that is not related to the precise reason that they've been hired. So even if they were hired to do a math tutorial, they can't then say, oh, you might like our English tutorial. They can only use the data to provide the service they've been hired to provide.
Okay, the next question that we have is, we are an elementary school district. The high school district asked us to send all grade 8 immunization records and discipline records and free and reduced data. Can we share the data with them?
So I would say that probably in some cases and probably not in some cases. And the reason for that is because there's no way to know that all the kids who are in that elementary district are going to go to the high school. So it could be that as those kids transfer into the school, that the high school would have a legitimate educational right to know certain information about the students so that they can make sure they're getting certain services. But kids who don't go to that high school, they don't have any legitimate educational interest, you know, just off the bat. You know, if those kids move out of the district or go to a different school, they could not claim that they have a legitimate educational reason to see the records of those students. And so I guess I would need to know a little bit more about the situation and understand why it is that they couldn't just get that information through the regular registration process that, you know, parents complete at the beginning of each school year.
And also some of that information will transfer with the student with their SSID once they go into the high school. So you'd have that information in CALPAD.
But it seems like that's a real overreach to say that they just automatically get the information of all kids. That doesn't seem
right. Okay, here's another good question. Can you repeat which items are considered exception to be automatically released even without parent consent? You mentioned an ed code and military.
So there are a number of instances that are specifically outlined in FERPA in which student data can be shared without parental consent. The most common situations would be, for example, an emergency situation. So if there's a fire, there's a flood, there's a concern that a student is a danger to themselves or to others. In those situations, first responders can know who's there so that they can make sure everybody's out and safe. But that does not mean that they would then have access to the entire student information system or something like that. There's also situations where a contractor, so for example, like we've got going on today, we've got CALPADS here assisting with CALPADS, so they have access to the student data that they need to have access to do the services that CDE has hired them to do. But that doesn't, again, mean that they're going to have access to all of our data systems. It just means that they're going to have access to the information they need to do their job. And so that's another situation that FERPA allows. If you've hired a vendor to do something that you would normally do yourself, but you don't have the bandwidth to do it, so you hire somebody to do it for you. At the school level, sometimes, say, for example, a counselor is brought in to help out with a certain situation. They would have access to the students they were hired to assist, but not access to the entire student information system for the entire school.
Okay. They wanted to know if we can give more details about CIPA and what are schools required to implement in order to protect minors.
So this normally comes into play in the school libraries. And so, for example, the filtering software that you would normally see in a school library, that is what is in place as a result of CIPA. And so obviously, those of us who are parents and educators know that that's not going to catch everything. And in some instances, it's actually going to block some things that you might actually want to have access to. So what if a student is doing a research paper on breast cancer, for example? You don't want every single website that says something about breast in it to be blocked. So, a little bit of common sense needs to come into play there as well. But I would this is a question that I would punt to your legal counsel and to the technology experts at your district to just find out more at the local level what is being done at your district to ensure compliance with that particular regulation.
And this is kind of a general question, but they were asking, how do we share student data with teachers if not by email, or share data with the service desk without giving a screenshot? They were just trying to figure out how are we supposed to show specific information.
Sure, and so I would say that an SSID is a great way to share information. A lot of times, if someone has an SSID, then from wherever they are, they can, if they have access to CALPADS or something like that, they can look up whatever information it is they need to know. Another great way is just pick up the phone or take a walk. There are times when you just need a quick question answered. You can just pick up the phone and ask the question over the phone, and you're not putting student information into email, which is a hacker's best friend. Email was meant to be a convenient way to share information, but it was never meant to be a secure way to share information. And so if you put information out there on email, there's a good chance it could get hacked. And it puts your school, your district, yourself at risk when you're putting sensitive information in email.
I think we're going to go ahead and stop on the questions right now so that we can continue going through the presentation. However, we'll go ahead and answer some of these questions on our Q&A. But if your questions are not answered, go ahead and send in a service desk ticket, and we'll answer them that way as well.
This is MJ again. Thank you, Elizabeth. I think that, again, we have a great opportunity today, so you can ask questions, but do know that if there are questions that we get at the service desk that we feel are better answered by CDE, or that we have, we have experts right here, they're right down the street from us, and so we are happy to forward information when we know that it can be better answered by someone like Elizabeth or Marianne. And so do know that that is a resource that's always available to you as well. So I want to take a quick moment here to just go back to some concepts in data privacy. We're going to look at, and you asked some great questions about both privacy and security. And so I want to make sure that we're clear on the two differences between data privacy and data security. So data privacy and data privacy procedures look at our ethical and legal requirements for protecting confidentiality of data. And so on slide 16 in the left box, you see terms that we might consider to be directory information. What athletic team a certain student plays with, the attendance, maybe somebody gets perfect attendance and their name is listed in publication, photographs of students, the grade of a student, or even some LEAs consider addresses to be directory information. And so this is the kind of data privacy policies talk to us about what information it is that we're allowed to share and how we can share that information, to whom we're able to share it with, and under what circumstances we are allowed to share information with or to use information for the purposes of certain activities. Whereas data security policies and procedures focus on the technicalities of sharing that information. So once you know that something is a piece of information you're allowed to share, but it must be shared in an encrypted way, data security is what we look to for those kinds of guidance. How we would extract and save information from CALPADS. If you save that on your laptop, is that a secure place for that kind of information? If you have a thumb drive, let's say you took some raw data out of CALPADS in an ODS extract and you put it on a thumb drive and you go give that information to someone on their computer, what do you do with that thumb drive when you're done? Those are data security policies, how you handle materials securely. Emailing, we've mentioned this before, emailing a screenshot of personally identifying information. Of course, email is not secure. We know it can be hacked. But maybe you have an encrypted email service at your LEA, or maybe you have a password-protected folder on the network that only you and the superintendent have access to. Those are security policies and procedures that can help you to enact your data privacy policy. Some of you, I would say very few of you, wear more than one hat, and I'm saying that tongue-in-cheek, but there are many LEA admins who don't have this responsibility. There are probably just a few statewide. Depending on what your role is in the organization and how big your organization is, you may or may not be directly responsible for any of these things. Most people aren't, but you do know someone in your LEA who is. There's an IT person or a director of IT or a security office that handles the types of email protections that you have, that deals with antivirus and firewall systems, that encrypts your Wi-Fi so that only those who have access to the network should, that handles the storage, the cloud data storage systems that you use for your data, and that handles the network itself. So there is an overlap between data privacy and data security. Both have policies and procedures. Privacy is really governed by state and federal laws, where security is managed through hardware and software. Both privacy and security have local practices, and they focus around access rights and decisions about who is able to see and use the data, and then how the data is seen and used. But security looks at encryption methods rather than those decision-making protocols. And both privacy and security have individual best practices, but security follows an industry-wide infrastructure best practice. Even with all those protections in place, most cyber attacks target human behavior. And so a few precautions, like we talked about before, those common sense approaches to data privacy and data security can go a long way. You know, when we talk about personal information, we're talking about, let's say like food service asks you for a list of kids who receive free or reduced meals. How is it that you get that information from your systems, both your local SIS and also CALPADS? How do you get that information and give it to them? Are you walking into them on a thumb drive? How do you know that email is truly from them? I know it may seem like, you know that this person is going to ask you for this and you know that you're going to have to comply, but asking those questions and just taking a second beat on making sure that everything is the way it should be can really go a long way in protecting the data. It's an important place to start a conversation as well. So typically, 99% of the time, what we're asked for is the thing we're going to provide, and it is being asked by the right person, and we're going to provide it in a safe and secure manner based on policies. But having that pause between the request and the response also gives us a chance to have a conversation about using the most appropriate methods to make the determination that this is information we should share, and then talking about how we are going to share it. So I want to look at how we access CALPADS. In order to comply with state and federal regulations, we know that CALPADS has a very limited number of authorized users, and we use CALPADS only for legitimate business needs. So we know that you work in your SIS, your student information system, with your student data every single day, and that accessing CALPADS to report and extract information is a critical, vital part of what you do every day. It's critical and vital to your local data and your local LEA, but it's also critical and vital to California and education of students statewide. So today we want to take a deeper look at the process of how you become an LEA admin account holder in CALPADS. The process is meant to both protect you and to inform you, and not only to protect you and inform you, the user, but also the person who supervises you and the person who certifies CALPADS data. We also want to take this opportunity for a really clear definition of the expectations of your role as an LEA admin account holder. So we're on slide 21, for those of you who may be following along in a printed format. Before we begin talking about CALPADS, I want to take a quick sidebar and let you know that today when we're talking about CALPADS, we're not going to talk about how you log in or how you move around or navigate in CALPADS. You can learn more about navigation and login protocols in the Essentials 2 training that's given by CSIS. We have a self-paced version, and then we also give the training at the beginning of the, probably in the, around after end of year submission. Essentials 2 is found on the CSIS website. This is kind of the, a screenshot of what the login page looks like for the training. The contents of that training focus more on account management, password management, and security management. Also, we look at functionality of CALPADS and some concepts about navigating. We look at code mapping and security features. So that's not going to happen here. But I did provide you the website if you're interested in taking that self-paced training, or if you're new to CALPADS. Definitely, we call them Essentials for a reason. There's 1 through 4, and you need to take them if you're new to CALPADS. Each LEA has at least one person who is the central coordinator for all the other individuals who are going to have an account in CALPADS at that LEA. And we call that person the LEA admin. So the way that you get this role and this login in CALPADS happens via this process that you see on screen on slide 22. So the newest version of the LEA admin application is January of 2018. And it's fairly long. It's about 18 pages. There are 2 appendices, and we're going to go into more details about them. But this is the process on how you become the LEA admin. You submit a service request to the CALPADS service desk, and you will then be sent, CSIS will forward your application request to CDE, and they will attach an application, this document, and send it back to you in the ticketing system. You can print it out and have your superintendent or charter school administrator read, review, and sign that document, and then return it in the ticket system. We expect that every LEA admin will eventually be required to complete a data privacy training like the one we're doing today, and that would be the first responsibility of the LEA admin. And then the second, in terms of the application process, and then the second responsibility is to review the additional training materials with LEA site users and LEA school site users. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Additionally, if you are the LEA admin account holder and your superintendent or charter school administrator leaves during the school year or their position changes for whatever reason, we also ask that you reinitiate this process and request another application. This is a really good opportunity for your supervisor, superintendent, or charter school administrator to review the scope and responsibility that is placed in your hands as the admin, so that they have an understanding of, how important and how much responsibility we're giving you in this. We really want to have a team approach through the governance of this data, and so it's important that that information is shared with any new staff who come on board in your LEA. As I mentioned, the purpose of the document is to outline the responsibilities, the roles, and the behaviors expected of the LEA admin and the LEA and school level users. Its purpose is truly to be an overview, but it is 18 pages long, and so that's why we want to take some time today to talk about the specifics that you are agreeing to in terms of data privacy and the use of CALPADS. So I mentioned that there are two appendices. Appendix A is a tool for the LEA admin, those of you here on the call today, to share with those LEA and school level account holders. You can kind of go through, we're about to show you each of the items in Appendix B, and I'll kind of point out how Appendix A and Appendix B are different. It's also a way for you to have a conversation with your charter school admin or your superintendent about the expectations of other staff who have access to CALPADS as well. And so we are recommending that Appendix A and B are printed materials that you can use when you have those conversations. So again, I want to remind you the FERPA language of legitimate business need. We see the business that the LEA admins have in terms of the module in CALPADS where you create, revoke, and assign roles to individuals as legitimate business needs. And we expect that you are taking this role seriously, that you are making some kind of documented analysis of those individuals who have an account. This responsibility is taken seriously because you're deciding that these individuals you're making accounts for are individuals who have a legitimate business need to access data or input data into CALPADS. And that happens here. This is, in the upper left-hand corner is a screenshot excerpt of the Appendix A. This is what a school level CALPADS user or an LEA account holder would see. And we are recommending that you actually print and review this document with those individuals you create accounts for, and that you ask them to sign and date it, just so you have a paper copy, and you've covered your own basis. You remember when you last talked to this person. And then the right-hand box is a screenshot excerpt from the maintain user module in CALPADS. This is where we would assign roles to specific users. And we know where I work at the service desk, and I often help people kind of determine what roles they need in order to see which reports or in order to have access to certain data. We know that it's very easy to click all and then click assign roles and then have every person in your LEA have every single role, but that doesn't go along with the FERPA requirement of legitimate business need. And so we're asking LEA admin account holders to really be thoughtful, and we're hoping that you have a process that helps you determine which tasks and which positions in your LEA require certain roles. If that's documented, then you're following a process that is outlined in policy, and that's kind of a safer bet than just determining things based on you knowing who does what. So I want to take a quick break to see if there's any questions related to data privacy or data security that we wanted to answer right here before we move into the aspects of the application. see anything pressing that you want to mention?
Well, this is Elizabeth again from the CDE, and I'm answering questions as quickly as I can here. But one question I'm looking at right now is, do school resource officers have a right to log into the student information system and look at student records? Again, I'm going to just reiterate, anyone who looks at a student record should meet the bar of having a legitimate educational interest in that record. So, for example, curiosity is not a legitimate educational interest. Just wanting to see how one class is doing compared to your class is not a legitimate educational interest. You need to be someone who is actually involved in providing some kind of educational service to a student in order to to legitimately have access to the record.
Elizabeth, would you think that that would be in somebody's privacy policies or procedures that the district might create and the board sign off on?
There should be. There should be in your local policies, and anything that's happening should always happen in concert with your legal counsel, your IT staff at your district, and I know that the Privacy Technical Assistance Center, which was referenced earlier, they're the ones that put out the video that we watched. You can go to their website, which is studentprivacy.ed.gov, and I believe that they have some specific information about when law enforcement should be able to have access to student records.
And again, this is MJ. The training today is more narrow in that we're looking at student data privacy and CALPADS, the use of CALPADS. But these questions are great questions to forward to CDE. You can specifically contact Elizabeth. She has a Twitter account that she handles here. It's at CDE Privacy.
And I also have an email address that is just privacy@cde.ca.gov.
And in the resources section of the training, I'm going to give Elizabeth a chance to talk about EDGO and some CDE projects that she works on so that you can ask those kind of more broad questions that are not tied explicitly to CALPADS.
I also wanted to mention that we have quite a few questions about view only, and I talked to Martha, and Martha said, stay tuned for the CIN in April.
Yeah, hopefully everyone will be there for big announcements and more information about what's up and coming with CALPADS. Okay, so let's head back to our presentation. What exactly is it that we are agreeing to when we take on the role of LEA Admin for your CALPADS requirements? So the LEA Admin application is meant to explicitly cover the areas of work that you handle in CALPADS and how they interact with data privacy and security. The application was made and developed over a long period of time with many people, including legal counsel, and it is meant to comply with all federal and state laws. So we know as we go through these 17 things, I talk to LEA admins very frequently and have worked with you as the submission periods have gone over the last year, and I know that you already consider many of the things I'm about to share with you in the work that you do every day. I know that people are very thoughtful about how they share information and how they work with student data, and that generally people are very cautious about what they do because they know that this data is personal information and is private. So today's presentation is really to help us to dig deeper, look at some guidance around student data privacy and security, and maybe to start thinking about areas of ambiguity or confusion so that you can take those back to your supervisor, or you can have a discussion about data governance with other people who work with the data as well. We just want to give you a chance to step back and dig a little deeper into some of the items on this kind of lengthy document so that you understand where each of the items comes from. And I want you to know, too, that you are not alone. The admin application is long, and it is required that your superintendent or charter school administrator authorize you as the user because we wanted them to read the document as well. We want them to know how important and the scope and responsibility that you're being asked to undertake. So with that, number one, every LEA has local site training, and you have trainings like this, statewide training on CALPADS and data privacy. We're asking you to know and follow security and privacy policies locally as your LEA has those trainings. And then also to take it upon yourself to learn as much as you can about the security and privacy policies that govern the work you do. We want to control access to personal identifying information and sensitive information by using policy to assign those roles and security levels to all account holders. We want to make sure that folks in your LEA staff who have access to CALPADS should have access to CALPADS, just to do the work that they need to do for legitimate business purposes. Number two, that you know and follow the security and privacy state and federal laws that are in place to protect the CALPADS data. And again, I recognize that, everyone comes to this job with a different background and different experiences. I'm sure we have someone out there who's a lawyer, and we have people who, don't have any experience at all. So we know that, and we just want you to use common sense to seek out more information when you need to, and to ask questions so that you know that you're being covered. Just a note too, because you don't know, that's not, saying you don't know or you don't understand some state or federal rule doesn't eliminate the responsibility to still follow the law that's in place. So we want to host this training and also answer any questions you may have afterwards so that we can spark conversations and we can get questions from you to strengthen the training we provide and to provide more guidance. Again, that we saw in FERPA, there's the explicit language, legitimate and authorized business need to access the data in CALPADS. And I looked up at the presentation and I saw that someone was asking analysis. And basically what I'm saying is it's much better for standard practice to have some kind of protocol in place how you assign, if you're the LEA admin account holder and you're assigning out roles and security levels to people, it's best to have something in writing about how you make those decisions, because if later it becomes an issue that that person didn't have a legitimate or authorized business need and you're the one who assigned them the role, you'll want to know what factors you took into consideration when you gave out that role. And this is what I mean by taking just that extra step or that extra beat or pause to have something documented, or at least ask the question where that documentation is. Number 4, if you suspect or know of a security or privacy violation, that you'll contact the CALPADS service desk immediately, as well as inform your local LEA in accordance with your policies. So this begs the question, what are our local policies about misuse of information or data? Do you know those? Who are you supposed to contact if you suspect or if you know that someone is misusing data or is unauthorized to see the data that they have? And what are the guidelines locally for appropriate use of student data and appropriate release of student data? You'll want to know the differences so that you can be aware if a misuse of information occurred. Number 5, we're on slide 33. I understand that direct certification, foster youth, free and reduced meals, special education data, these are all specific roles that have been assigned to an individual, and they're considered highly sensitive data. So ensuring that this data is handled with the utmost privacy and security, and every caution will be used to protect this information from unauthorized access, exposure, or distribution. So we know that people are curious and people are nosy, and sometimes people are downright rude and they want to know what they want to know. People in your district know that you have access to private information. They know that you have sensitive information in CALPADS. And so it's important that you know that an individual requesting data from you has a legitimate business need for the information. It's okay to ask questions like when someone asks you for this information. Number 6 asks that you read, understood, and comply with the notice on the login screen for CALPADS. And so we're going to take just a minute here, literally a minute. This is the notice from the CALPADS login screen, and I'm going to go silent for 60 seconds. I'm going to give you a whole minute to read through this information. If you only read through this word for word once a year, please let it be right now. That was a 60 seconds before our timer is not accurate. So in looking at the notice, I'm sure you've all read it if at least 100 times in the last month, with the deadline just happening last week. So I want to also emphasize that I added the underlining and I changed the color of state and federal laws to red to highlight that the rules of behavior agreement for CALPADS local users, CALPADS LEA administrators and state users, those are the appendices and the overview sections of the LEA admin application. And I also wanted to draw your attention that state and federal laws are indicated here as being the overarching guidelines, so the overarching responsibility of the person who logs in, and that there are civil and criminal penalties under those state and federal laws that you could be prosecuted if you were misusing this data and this information. So it's serious business. Number 7, understanding the security and privacy of the password protocols. So right now, the minimum requirements for a password are at least 8 characters, has to have 1 uppercase and 1 lowercase letter, and then 1 of the non-alphanumeric characters, the special characters. Although security best practices would say that the longer a password is, the less likely it is to be cracked. So if you can think of a phrase or several words posted together where you use a symbol rather than a letter, or something that you'll remember but you don't have to write down, that would be even better than just following the minimum requirements. Number 8, that you will comply with the following rules governing user credentials, that you'll protect your login credential at all times, that you'll never share your user ID and or password with anyone, avoid using a local browser feature that automatically saves and completes your passwords when you put in your user ID, and then you'll avoid writing your password down. And then with that, there is the caveat underneath that. It actually says on the application, if I need to write my password down, I'll keep this information in a secure area. So please don't put it on a sticky note and put it under your mouse pad or under your desktop. Put it somewhere else where no one else will see it, and if you need to retrieve it, you have to go somewhere or do something that doesn't look like you're logging into your computer. I personally have had conversations more than once with LEA admins who I'm emailing back and forth with them, and then I call them to ask them a follow-up question, and it's actually not the person that I thought I was emailing with, but that person went on maternity leave, and so their replacement is now using their email address and also their login to CALPADS. And you know, this is just really bad practice for general electronic life, because you're responsible for whatever someone else does under your user ID and password in CALPADS. And we just really, you're the LEA admin, you can easily make another role you can make another account for that person and give them the roles that they need while you're gone. In your absence, they can take on those responsibilities for you. Similarly, email user logins like registrar.lea, those are very general, and there's no one person that would be accountable to that user login, so we discourage you from doing that. We really want to have personal responsibility and a person to tie to each of the transactions that happens in CALPADS. Number 9, that you will protect CALPADS information in any form, including information that's printed or downloaded onto computers or laptops. I'm not sure who's using DVDs or compact discs anymore, but any data that you have from CALPADS or from your SIS that you download or extract, that you'll protect that information, and that if it's on a portable storage device like a laptop, I think people don't necessarily consider their laptop a portable storage device, but it is, that you'll protect that information as well. It's important that if you don't know what is considered encrypted or protected, that you talk to someone at your LEA about getting more information on encryption or on a password protected folder in your network, and learning how you can better protect information that you may have on portable devices. Number 10 speaks directly to the security of data. Logging out of your computer when you walk away, or locking it so that no one else can inadvertently go to your computer and log in. Also keeping printed documents and other media with CALPAD data in a locked drawer or away from anyone else, a locked office or a filing cabinet. If you have to print a report and forward it, rather than doing that through your interagency mail, actually bringing it to somebody, or ensuring that you know who you're handing that report off to, maybe having people sign for it as they take it for the superintendent or the person who's going to certify that data. And then understanding what it means to clean or destroy media with CALPADS data prior to actually disposing of it. Number 11, being aware of security issues like snooping, shoulder surfing, social engineering, faxing, virus scanning, patching, phishing, spear phishing, and whaling. Some of those we talked about on slide 6. I gave you a visual explanation of the kinds of common cyber attacks we see. But number 11 asks us to be aware of some of the kind of in-person activities that may happen. Snooping, maybe actual physically snooping at your desk. Similar to shoulder surfing. The picture on the slide here is that a woman is looking over the man's shoulder while he's looking at something on his laptop, sort of unaware that she's partaking in whatever he's looking at. Social engineering, asking questions about the kinds of work you do and the people's data that you may have. I recently talked to someone who told me that the moms group was talking about who received free lunches at their school, and the person in the moms group works with CALPADS data, so she was able to get that information. And that kind of happens through the act of social engineering. You think it's innocent to say that this is information that you know about, but it's actually not. And again, that's where I'm asking you to take pause, maybe ask an uncomfortable question like, why do you want to know, before you divulge that information. It's important that you stay current of the kinds of, without being paranoid. We don't want you to, I think it's fair with such a massive amount of data at your hands to appear a bit paranoid to people who don't otherwise know. It's a good opportunity for you to share the seriousness of the situation of security with the people you work with or anyone who's asking those kinds of questions. To challenge the nosy. Numbers 1 through 11 speak to both the LEA administrator as well as the LEA and school site user. Appendix A covers the same material we've just covered, items 1 through 11. Appendix B, which is specific to those who have the ability to create other user accounts, covers 12 through 17. And so right now we're going to look at just that information on the Appendix B that is specific to the LEA admin application process. So number 12 asks you to complete the annual administrator application and attend a privacy training like the one we're doing now at least once a year, and I mentioned that earlier when we talked about the process of getting an application. Number 13 says that you'll configure your LEA system features at least once a year to ensure that those who have access to CALPADS have the right roles and the right security level. We want to make sure that the right people have the right access and that those people who don't have a need or a legitimate business need to this data in CALPADS don't actually have it. So this would mean that you know how to revoke roles, including the anomaly role, and in CALPADS you know how to revoke accounts as well. Number 14 asks that you as an LEA admin account holder will have conversation at least annually with those other users whose accounts you created and you are responsible to maintain. And this is a great opportunity for you to talk to them not only about data privacy and data security, but also about managing their account, getting their security questions answered so you don't have to reset their password for them, you know, every time they need to get in, that they can do that themselves. But specifically, we want you to cover the information on Appendix A, and it's our recommendation from thesis that you get them to sign and date that piece of paper, and then you take that back with you so that you have a printed copy of your conversation with that individual. Number 15, this is the screenshot from CALPADS from the user security module. This is the create user screen, and you can see where there's some bogus data in here, but you can see where the roles are. And we want you to review that yearly, at least yearly, or when your staffing changes happen. We ask that you review the LEA Operations Manual in CALPAD and comply with all CALPAD's requirements that are listed as the LEA Admin. And anyone can look at this. It's under the Help menu. So if you have both an LEA account and an LEA Admin account, doesn't matter which one you're in, you can still look at the LEA Operations Manual. It's under the Help menu item in the main item tab. And number 17, if the superintendent or charter school administrator who signed your application is no longer in that position due to retirement, termination, death, or any other reason, you will complete a new application, a new LEA admin application, and get the signature of the new person. And again, this is to make sure that those obligations that you have under the application are shared with that superintendent or charter school administrator so that they understand the scope of the work you're being asked to do. So this slide, slide 47, is sort of a summary of Appendix B, that you have the obligation to know, read, follow, and comply with state and federal laws that relate to student data, that you understand the idea of legitimate business need and you're using that as a way to determine who has access and use of data, that you know and read and understand the login notice, that you stay abreast and up to date with current computer privacy and password protocols, both locally and then anything that changes here through CALPADS or requirements that come down from CDE, that you stay abreast of data privacy like snooping, shoulder surfing, social engineering, and those other cyber scams that are on slide 6, that you continue to learn about security and data privacy through the trainings that we offer at CSIS, CDE's trainings, and any trainings that you may have locally, and that you prepare your position, your desk, and your LEA with policies and procedures to help protect the data that you work with. We especially want to make sure that you leave this training with some questions about what your local breach protocol would be. So before we move on to, so those are the, that's kind of a high-level summary of what we just went over, items 1 through 17. Before we move on to some best practices and resources, I want to turn it over to CDE and see if there's any particular questions they want to answer at this time.
Sure. One of the things that we had a lot of people very excited about the CALPADS LEA Administration application and Appendix A and Appendix B. If you don't currently have one of those applications and you're really eager to get one of those applications, you can submit a service desk ticket and we will send that to you. Nothing is due until a year after you have submitted one. So if you submitted your application in May 2017, it's not due again until May 2018. So if you're looking at it and you're like, oh, I really want to get into my application, please submit a service desk ticket. Also, there's some very specific questions that you definitely will want to have your own local legal counsel and your administration look at. And we're really glad that you're asking these questions because it means that there's going to be a discussion at all of your LEAs about this. And so please, please refer to your administration and your legal counsel. We can give you generic information, but we don't have the ability to give you specifics on a lot of this.
And this is Martha. I'd like to add that our focus of this training wasn't on what should you do locally, but more to make you aware and be sure that you understand the expectations of having the LEA admin. And so I'm sure there's lots of questions that we may not get to immediately, but if you still have them, you send in the service ticket, you're going to have Elizabeth's contact info that you can reach her directly if you didn't get a response.
Right, and so this is Elizabeth, and I just wanted to say that, there are a ton of questions here, and we want to make sure they all get answered, but we also want to make sure we're not being too distracting from the content that you should be attending to right now in this presentation. So if you don't get your questions answered today, please don't feel like this is your last opportunity. Please reach out to us at any time. And if you do go to your administration or your IT support or your legal and find that you don't have something in place, but you would like to know where you could go to get started for a breach protocol or something like that, please feel free to reach out, and I'd be happy to direct you to some resources that other districts have found helpful.
So it sounds like there already are lots of potentials for conversations around data security and data privacy. Some questions that, we want to make sure that your level of familiarity with FERPA and other federal laws, that you can address those at the local level. You can look at the studentprivacy.ed.gov. The FERPA 101 and 201 trainings are there, and I'll show you those in the resources section. But I think it's important to kind of segue from this section about the appendices A and B into our best practices and resources with the idea of you thinking about what are the legitimate business needs of yourself and the other people who have access to CALPADS. You know, what specific roles and tasks do you have daily that you need to access CALPADS for, and what are those roles that the LEA and school site level users have as well, and how can you be the best protector of student data by outlining these in a more formal way, or at least having a list of those kinds of tasks that those jobs are, that those individuals holding the jobs are performing, and have those individuals signed an Appendix A for you? And when was the last time they signed it? How do people interpret the login notice on CALPADS? And what kinds of security protocols or password protocols are the individuals at your LEA using? What is the kind of local? Those are the kinds of things we're meant to kind of spark conversations directly about CALPADS. These other questions, very large questions, are more of a local level conversation that we can have you forward in service desk ticket. And we're going to give you some resources. Elizabeth will have a chance to talk to you in a minute too. So kind of along those lines, this concept of data governance is the ability for the group of people who have control over some set of data to ensure the accuracy, timeliness, usability, and security of that data. So good governance of data includes definitive roles and responsibilities for the people who have access to that data, for how we share that data. And in the diagram you see here, the data governance is in the center, but the technology, people, and processes revolve around that data. And this is to ensure that ownership, accessibility, security, quality, and knowledge are all components that are taken into consideration when policies and use are discussed. So good data governance has documented data systems and it has audit processes that are reviewed and updated annually and based on the feedback of users, that there are privacy implications associated with how you share data, or that you look at better ways to improve the sharing of data, that there are documented rules to avoid unauthorized disclosures, ways to unintentionally release private or personal identifying information prior to publishing the data, and that those are reviewed and updated on a regular basis, at least annually. This happens at the individual level through good data stewardship. People sometimes say that they are a data steward, and we like to think of it as more of an action rather than a title. But a good data stewardship has an annual data privacy review like this training, that the individual has a good understanding of privacy and security responsibilities within their own position, that they are able to communicate deadlines like certification deadlines and collection of data in order to meet those deadlines to stakeholders or other individuals who have access or create the data, that they understand there's a set of specific data required and resources for how to get that they are able to have relationships with people who can check the accuracy of data, that the documentation of policies and procedures on the local level is enhanced and feedback is given from the people who come in contact with the data so that that can be a more streamlined process, and that data is managed into systems that are workable given the circumstances of your LEA. We recognize everybody has a different environment that they work in. There's 1,900 LEAs statewide, and so of course you're going to have, this is going to look different depending on where you're at and who you are. Some questions you might ask yourself about data stewardship. Does your LEA have a system of governance that helps design rules, policies, and procedures that for decision making about how you collect data, how you use data, who is able to access or share data, and the security of that data? Is there a back and forth about a conversation about how that happens? Where is your policy for notification of misuse of information or breach of information? And are there available remedies posted? Do you have documentation for those procedures internally? Do you know what would happen if something were to occur? Does your LEA maintain a security process that's an industry best practice? And again, this might be an IT question, but it's important for us as people who share data to know how we can get information about doing it securely. Does your LEA provide a designated place or a contact area where students and families can learn more about their rights, or they can have questions answered about student data collection, use, and security? So if they want to know about those opt-out options, is there a place they can specifically, or a person they can talk to specifically, and do you know who that person is? This is from the Privacy Technical Assistance Center, and this email, the URL here is an older version of their website. So the newer version is
studentprivacy.ed.gov.
And so that site has, this is a best practices for a local privacy program. And more than telling you, this is what it looks like, we just want you to read through it and kind of ask yourself some questions about if you know that if these things occur where you are at. Do you understand what the student data life cycle is? And are there state and federal laws in place around the procedures that you have documented? Do you regularly get training on policy and procedures? These are, this is just a recommendation for what a local privacy program would contain. More specifically, this is the data lifecycle best practices. So having guidelines, policies, and procedures around the collection of and creation of data, how you retain data and how long you retain data, this should all be documented information. Where you store it and how you store it. You may at the local level have rules about where student data is stored. How you use, and we focus a lot on the use of student data and sharing of student data because CALPADS requires you to do that. We need to get that information from you and then push it forward into CALPADS, the application from your SIS. So we're doing a lot of sharing and using. But where locally are your guidelines or your policies about how you can use the data you have and how you can share it? What are the secure ways in which the guidelines specify sharing and use? And then disposition, not only how you dispose of student data, but how long does it take before you get rid of it, and what methods are appropriate based on how you stored it. Some really specific additional training on data privacy that I think this is the studentprivacy.ed.gov. This is the PTAC site. But this is the FERPA 101 and FERPA 201 trainings, and these are geared directly towards LEAs. And I think that these are really, they're short and they're really digestible. They're completely understandable for people in the K-12 school environment and speak directly to your responsibilities under FERPA. Another really great and very reputable site is the FERPA Sherpa, and now that I've said the name, you'll probably never forget it, so it's a good site just for that. This is a really awesome resource because it has different views. So the way that you can access the data that's here under is based on the way you want to look at it. So if you are a student or a parent, if you're an educator, and the LEA or an SEA, which is a state educational agency like us, these are different views that you can take on FERPA. And they have a very robust resource search. So their section has a place so you can indicate what view it is that you have. So if you want to share something with a parent, you might be looking for a resource that speaks directly to a parent's interest in FERPA, or you may be looking for your LEA and guidance around what kinds of resources are available for LEAs. So you can put in the topic, You can put in the person or the focus for that search, that individual who wants more information, and then you can put in the type of data that you're looking for. In this case, I put in case study, data breaches, data collection, data governance. They have a ton of information, articles, blogs, videos, they have tons of stuff. Another really great way to learn more about data privacy is, this is the Excellence in Education Foundation. This is a free self-paced course. It's really on target and has tons of state and federal experts who talk to you in these 6 modules around school privacy. They also send you a certification when you're done, and you get an electronic badge that says you've gone through the school student data privacy. They talk a lot about FERPA and sort of the federal level of data privacy. It's closed captioned, and it has tons and tons of printed materials too that you can share, some really great infographics that show the life cycle of student data and how data is used by researchers. And it's important for us to protect it, of course, for privacy reasons, but also because we want to continue using it to increase the capacity of education, of public education. That's really the goal here, is to amass as much information as we can in a private way, but to encourage education to grow. And EDGO, this is the Educational Data Governance site on CDE's website. I'm going to let Elizabeth talk a little bit about this.
Thank you. Okay, so data governance is sort of, as mentioned, it's an organization-wide understanding of what data you have, what are the policies around that data, who has access to the data and under what conditions. And a lot of times what we found at CDE when we were standing up our data governance program, there was a lot of great stuff already happening with data, but it wasn't necessarily like super transparent, or it wasn't formalized. It wasn't written down so that people understood the processes for accessing data or the processes for securing data. We wanted to make sure that things were standardized so that, for example, we weren't collecting race ethnicity data in one collection one way and in another collection another way, because that makes it really hard to compare information down the road. So if you don't have a formal data governance program in place, this might be a great conversation starter at your school or district, is to sort of say, hey, could we get a common understanding of what data we have, who has access to it, and under what conditions? And if you go to the CDE's Educational Data Governance website, or EDGO website, there are some resources there that you can check out that are great tools for getting started with data governance. I do know today I was poking around on there are a couple of links that are broken, but I'm working on getting those fixed. And if you want direct information, I also monitor the EDGO at cde.ca.gov mailbox, so you can contact me there. You can contact me at privacy.cde.ca.gov, any of those places. So I would love to be able to empower you with some tools that you can take back to your schools and districts to have a conversation around data, and not only be keeping it safe and secure, but also using it in ways to inform decisions that you make at the local level.
Thank you, Elizabeth. This is the model notification of rights under FERPA from the U.S. Department of Education. So this is the federal government's model that for parents to know about FERPA's opt-out policy, just here as a reference for you or guidance. Here are some other places to start your search for data privacy resources: the U.S. Department of Education, the Privacy Technical Assistance Center, and this link is not the most accurate link. It's that student data, studentprivacy.ed.gov. They've changed their website URL, but the information is exactly the same as the information that they had when they were on the Privacy Technical Assistance Center. The CA Department of Education, we're here today at CDE. This is a data privacy laws page, and there's some FAQs listed here. So if you have more, I also listed a more direct link in the notes in the web, in the slide presentation. There's also a URL to this document, Recommendations for the EdTech Industry to Protect the Privacy of Student Data, from the California Attorney General. The recommendations, those common sense recommendations, are from this document, which really speaks to vendors, but also has a big section on LEAs as well. So if you are one of the small percentage of folks who work in data security, this is the Technical Assistance and Professional Development Project. They offer some no-cost, these slides are, I think this one first. They offer no-cost IT professionals some training around those kinds of IT data security. You can see the list of webinars is here. It's really small to read. I'll read it to you. It's social engineering webinars or security in the cloud, ransomware webinars, two-factor authentication webinar, the Internet of Things, which is important for those of you who have lots of devices at your school. It's important to know, too, that they're funded through AB 104, the Adult Education Block Grant, and they only have money, it's been extended until June of 2020. So if you do want to take any of those kinds of webinar trainings or use any of the services they offer, do it as soon as possible.
Oh, that's actually been extended to 2020. Did you say that right? Yeah, okay. So
yeah,
there's $4 million just waiting.
So yeah, definitely check it out or pass along that information. If that's not in your wheelhouse of responsibility, pass that along to your IT. That'll probably be something they may be interested in. So I have two slides. I have a wrap-up slide and I have a reminder slide. And so they're kind of similar, but I want to go over the wrap-up slide first. So we want to make sure that you leave today with the understanding or the concept of data governance and data stewardship. These may be new concepts to you. They may be actions and guidance that you've been using, but just the terms are new. We hope to use these concepts and terms in a more universal way as we move forward in training. We also want to make sure that you're aware that those federal and state laws, those LEA policies, those board policies that you have that affect the work you do in CALPADS, and if you're not sure what they are, we want you to walk away with some questions for people at your local level. We hope to have provided you some more information about the intersection of your specific duties with CALPADS and state and federal laws. We want you to be able to assess the obligations you have as the LEA Admin application, the LEA Admin account holder, and know what responsibility you have to those school level and LEA level account holders. That you can see your local level data privacy practices and where you fall into place in those. And that you're able to kind of assess some best practices and industry standards and to look at further trainings related to school data and privacy. Some reminders, regardless of your knowledge or awareness or understanding of those state and federal laws, you're still responsible for them, so we really want you to seek out as much information and ask as many questions as possible. Starting around the 1920 school year, the admin application is going to be a requirement for annual renewal, and so you'll need to also take a data privacy training much like this one. Again, we want to make sure that you have that opportunity to audit new users and roles, and that you also are able to share your responsibilities with the new superintendent or admin. As a best practice, we want you to develop your own privacy program between you and those you create accounts for, and to train those data users on policies and procedures around CALPADS. And then to know that there are multiple state and federal resources available to help you understand those obligations you have under the law, under your policies locally, and that there are ways that you can grow and learn student data and also to comply with the requirements of the CALPADS LEA Admin account. So we want to take this moment to acknowledge that everybody comes here with a different starting place. Everyone's work environment is different. So we want you to start with what you have. Start where you are and use what you know, both from the training, from what you brought before you came, and those questions that you have now, to do what you can to ask questions of those folks you have available to you locally, those folks you have here through the service desk and CDE. We want you to begin sort of a journey of preparing yourself for being the LEA admin under the new LEA admin application with these appendices A and B, and also to just continue to grow your own student data privacy at your local level. So I've included a slide. This is the ticket through the website, and then here's the email for the support, for the service desk support. We're going to take some questions, but I also, I think we'll answer questions. We'll have Elizabeth and Marianne answer questions, but I do want to really want to beg you to fill out the application, fill out the survey here. This is the link to the survey, and in the notes you'll see there's a long link, and then this is the bit.ly link, so it's just a shorter version of the URL so you can get to the survey. But it is a little bit longer than our normal CSIS surveys. We want to get as much information as we can about how this training provided you with information based on the objectives, and so that we can, because we have to give this training annually, we want to make it as robust and as on target as you need it to be. So please do give us as much feedback as you can. We do take it seriously. We read every single response, and many of our trainings have improved over time because of your input. So if you answer the survey here, or if you want to send in a ticket with specific with some specific feedback, that would be great too. I'm going to move it back to, I'm just going to leave it on the survey so that people can answer the survey in another window. But if you have questions, you can continue to type them here. And are we going to answer?
Well, we only have 15 more minutes, so we're not going to get through everybody. And so again, if your question isn't answered, to then send in a service ticket, and we'll route it to the right person to get you the answer, but we will do a few. This is Martha. And so some of the questions have been, is this going to be recorded? Where can I get the application? A lot of that is going on. We will offer this training again at the end of May. There'll be a registration for it. We have about 600 people that joined us today. There's over 1,800 LEA admins, and this session is specifically for the LEA admin and what the expectation is for them having that role. So we will offer some more courses. Eventually, this will get recorded. It has to be transcribed because we do have to have the wording at the bottom of it, and it'll get posted. I'm not sure when that will happen, but that is our goal, to get this out there so that you guys can use it locally in your sites for other folks. But again, the focus of this was for the LEA admin and setting expectations when you have that role and what you're supposed to do with CALPADS. And we felt it was important to give you a little bit of background of state laws and federal laws and a lot of resources to do that work. So now that I used up a few of your minutes for asking questions, I'll give it back to Marianne and Elizabeth. And again, 2:30 we're done, and then anything that we don't answer, we'll have you send in a service ticket.
Yes, so first of all, just to let you know, if you have submitted an application in 2017, you need to submit an application in 2018, and you'll need to submit an application in 2019. So it's going to be a yearly thing on the month that you submitted it at this time, and the training is going to be in the spring. So if you have been trained today, then you're good to go for 2018-19 school year. But for 2019-20 school year, you're going to need to get trained next year at about this time. Okay? So hopefully that'll answer some of those questions.
And I just want to emphasize that it is important to get training every year because, as all of us have been watching in the news, data privacy information changes very rapidly. There's a lot of stuff happening with different kinds of scams popping up every day. So it is important that you are, attending to this information at least once a year to remind yourself of best practices and also to get current on the current laws and also the current best practices.
Yes, and then so we're going to tackle some as generic as possible questions. There's a lot of specific questions, and we're really excited for you to have that conversation with your admins and your legal counsel. But Elizabeth, do you want to answer, do LEAs define directory information in local policies?
Yes, they do. So it is up to your school or district to define what is going to be considered directory information. And then, again, as mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, you have to give parents an opportunity to opt out of that. If a parent doesn't want their kid's picture showing up in the yearbook or showing up on a school website, they have the right under FERPA to opt out of that. That doesn't mean that we can't collect information to make sure that their kids get services, but it does mean that you wouldn't be publicly sharing that in a place like a yearbook or a website or something like that.
And that directory information has to be documented, and the parents have to have access to it, so everybody is aware of what the directory information is.
Right, that's an annual requirement under FERPA. You know, all of us as parents, those of us who are parents, there's a lot of paperwork you have to fill out at the beginning of every school year. A lot of it is automated at this time, but somewhere in there under FERPA, there should be a list of what is considered directory information in your school or your district. And if you would like more information about that, I recommend that you go on over to studentprivacy.ed.gov, and they have short little videos about directory information that you could, you know, share with parents, share with staff, you know, pop into a staff meeting that you're having anyway. Just a little 2-minute video that, you know, explains what directory information is and how a school should be handling that information.
Another generic, this is Mary Ann again, another generic question is, who can have access to what data? And that was answered a little bit, but Elizabeth, do you want to just specify an educational purpose, right?
Right, and so again, you need to really be having conversations about specifically who's going to have access to information with your legal counsel, the administrators where you are. But under FERPA, you need to demonstrate that you have a legitimate educational interest in that record. And so, for example, just wanting to know what's going on with a particular student that you're not involved in educating currently, that is not a legitimate educational purpose. That's my understanding from what, you know, conferences and things that I've attended. So if you are going to be granting access to records and information, you need to work out with your legal counsel that those who are going to have access to those records have a legitimate educational interest in those records.
And it's likely it's some board policy as well that spells out that kind of access. And, you know, think about, you may have, I don't know, 50, 100 teachers. Should all of the teachers have access to all of the students, even though they're not educating all of those students, or should they only have access to their kids? Yeah. Questions that you got to have locally.
Right, and you know, I saw one question that had something to do with some counselors or, you know, interns being brought in. If those individuals are being brought in to assist 5 students, they should only have information about those 5 students. They shouldn't have access to the entire student information system.
Okay, one of the questions that I think is a really good one, where can we find examples of situations and the consequences of security breaches? We're having a hard time explaining it to our users, and having these examples would be very helpful.
So I would like to share that, you know, as we are able, you know, there's only a couple of us here at the CDE, but we have provided at the local level at conferences and at different LEAs who have requested the Privacy Technical Assistance Center, which again you can find the materials at studentprivacy.ed.gov. They have a great scenario that you can take and tailor as a professional development exercise at the local level, where it kind of walks you through a data breach, and it says, okay, let's all pretend, let's role play for a couple of hours here, and let's pretend that we've actually had a breach happen at our location. And it runs you through the process of deciding who's going to be responsible for what. It trickles out information a little bit at a time, because that's usually how a breach occurs. You usually don't know everything right off the bat. And at the end of the process, it gives you an opportunity to participate in like a press conference where you would actually have to respond to questions from, you know, people who have taken on the role of like an angry parent or a reporter. And we went through that exercise here at the CDE. We've taken it into the field, and people find it really valuable to walk through that, and it helps them to understand where the holes are in their own processes so that they can think more deeply about if and when a breach does come to us, how are we going to handle that, and what are the exact protocols and policies that we're going to go through. So that's available at studentprivacy.ed.gov, and also you can email me, and I'd be happy to share with you what we have here so that you can tailor that and use that exercise at the local level.
If you're just looking, this is MJ again, if you're just looking for examples of what has occurred, that map at the very beginning of the training from EdTech Strategies, if you just search Google K12 Cyber Attacks, that map will come up. And you can actually hover over each of those pins, and it will tell you when the occurrence happened, to what LEA it happened, and then the type of cyber scam that occurred and what the impact or outcome was. So if you're just looking generally to see sort of what what experiences other school entities have had happen, some of them are really frightening, and we know that.
And recent.
Yeah,
very
recent. There were 2 updates when doing this presentation. There was an update on the 18th and then one on the 25th, which was just a few days ago. So, you know, there's always things happening, and that's a really good source too. That agency has a vested interest in knowing what's going on. So they have more information about scenarios there.
And what I also love about that website, this is Elizabeth again, is that they have links to like the news reports and things like that, so you can actually watch the news stories about different breaches that have occurred. And I will also say that these are just the breaches that are known.
Yep.
These are the breaches that are known and in the media. There's a lot of information that's out there that, you know, folks just don't even know it's been breached yet. So, and you'll find, I think, the pattern that you'll find, as was mentioned in the training, majority of breaches happen as a result of human error. It's not a fault in the software or hardware generally. It's usually individuals who have access to the system not being careful about monitoring that access and locking it down.
And sometimes you may think it's just adults that are the perpetrators, but you know, we have occasions, we've seen the stories where students somehow got access to the SIS and went in and changed grades, and that is breach of data. So good examples on that slide.
Okay, and then someone asked, and this is Marianne again, if an honest mistake is made, could we be criminally prosecuted?
Oh goodness. So you know, that's a great general question, and you know, I guess it would depend on the specifics of the instance, and that way again would be up for you to discuss with your legal counsel. In the instances that I've seen where someone accidentally releases data, it's more a teachable moment. And please know that here at the CDE, we are here to provide a service to you and support. And so if, for example, and I've had it happen, somebody does email me student data, I just use that as a teachable moment to share with them, you know, the little video about why emailing data is not the most secure way to handle data. And just also help them understand ways in which they can accomplish what they need to accomplish and get students served, but without putting privacy at risk.
And this was such a great question. How do I assign a person who is training to take my position at the end of the school year? That is so proactive. Go team. This is really great, but really your superintendent or your charter school administrator is supposed to be the one that's assigning this position. But if that's somebody that your superintendent or charter school administrator wants to have, having that overlap of training is excellent, and you can kind of walk them through the steps. That would be a great procedure.
I would say, this is MJ again, I would say make sure that you contact CSIS service desk and let them know that you're in the process of training someone, so that someone from a field specialist can reach out to you and give you materials and kind of help walk you through that.
And that new person, if they're the LEA admin, you should be in the process of already getting them an application filled out so that the superintendent is acknowledging they want this person to have that role. That new person should not be sharing your account to gain access, even if you're training them. Right. So we only got time for a couple of more. Anything else, Marianne, that we want to? So hopefully you guys have filled out the survey. If 600 people came to this training, I would love to get 300 responses. It would be amazing.
Thank you again for your time. This is MJ. I recognize that, you know, this is probably your spring break, or possibly your spring break and possibly your lunchtime. So I have 2 thank yous, and I look forward to reading the feedback and talking to each of you more over the coming year.
And thank you to MJ for doing such a great presentation.
Thank you.
So no more questions?
Well, we have some questions, but most of them.
Yeah, there's about 28 questions still in the queue, and we will work through those and answer them.
Okay, super. So we're going to hang up. No more audio. Thank you, guys.